Bob, the Muny's 100th season is now history, but the history of the Muny is still on display at the History Museum.
So the history is not history.
That's correct. And our guest today is Sharon Smith, who is the curator of the exhibit Muny Memories at the History Museum, which goes on until when, Sharon?
It's there till June 2nd of next year.
So people still have lots of time to see it. It's a great exhibit.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. It was a lot of fun to do.
And I guess that the place to start is right at the beginning, which is a little bit before the Muny's time. Just this incredible picture right at the opening of something called the Pageant and Masks. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is to get a running start into why we even have this place called the Muny and why we are so excited about it being there for 100 seasons is the fact that we had this event in 1914, the Pageant and Masks, and it was a celebration of the city's 150th year of its founding. And so the great thing was they wanted to come back to Forest Park after the World's Fair and do this historic drama. They chose Art Hill, great space for a natural amphitheater, and they made this huge production, placed it in the Grand Basin of all things, right? Set a stage in the Grand Basin, placed 100,000 people on the Art Hill every night for 4 or 5 nights, and made this production with 7,000 St. Louis volunteers, right? And the great thing for me that I thought was important to say in this exhibit was think about how it connects to the Muny, even before they're thinking about such things, is you have a great stage, outdoor stage, huge sets, lots of people, even free seating. You have immaculate costumes, lots and lots of costumes and a huge cast, and a rain out. So of all of those things, what doesn't sound like the Muny? All of it sounds like the Muny, right? And so that was really an important first step for us, was to say, this is really how we begin outdoor theater experiences in Forest Park. And then we can go from there, and that panorama just says it all.
Oh, that's just such an amazing, with all those people on Art Hill and that huge stage. Yeah. It's unbelievable. Yeah. But I learned from the exhibit there was a little money left over.
That's right.
And so what was done with that money?
So the Pageant Drama Association, who had put the Pageant and Mask on, also then decided, well, you know, we have this extra money. What are we going to do with it? And so 2 years later, 1916, everybody was talking Shakespeare. It was the tercentenary, the 300th anniversary of his death. And so everybody was wanting to do productions of Shakespeare. St. Louis, no exception. They chose As You Like It as the play that they wanted to do, and the Pageant Drama Association said, let's go back to Forest Park. However, Art Hill seems a little big for a production of Shakespeare, especially this one, which was a wooded production, set in a wooded area, but more intimate. So they went around Forest Park and they came across this spot in Forest Park with 2 giant oaks and a flat space, and in front of them was a natural incline, and they thought this would be perfect for this production. And so again, let's see what it sounds like. There was, you know, seats were placed on this incline. You have a cast of about 1,000. Some of them are New York professional cast members. And you're outdoors in a space that has no walls, no ceiling, which also means that the weather was a factor. They had 2 rainouts for As You Like It. But again, it sounds a lot like what we know of the Muny.
Well,
and it became the spot.
And those 2 oak trees.
Those 2 oak trees were the basis for what we know of as the beginnings of the Muny then, because it becomes the same stage. Within a year or 2 then, they start looking at this space as, this is going to be our outdoor theater space. We just have to figure out how to make that happen. And so things were coming slowly. Some grand operas were being performed on that space, you know, fashion pageants and playground festivals and all of the things, while they created a space that would become the Muny.
It was so interesting that one of those very early photos, when it looked like maybe they were even looking around the place or beginning rehearsals or something, but it just looked like, oh, this is just part of Forest Park.
Yeah.
With trees and
trees everywhere,
grass and all, and
a river running behind
that's
it, right?
River de Pere.
The River de Pere would often flood.
Because there's another photo where they're closing over the River de Pere.
Right.
That you have.
So
yeah, all those historical incidents are fascinating. How do we get from that to this?
Right.
So it was also interesting that the concrete went in for a production of Aida.
Right. So what happens after As You Like It, with, again, a lot of success, people really came out for that week of performances, and they knew that this was going to be something that was going to last. They just needed to figure out how to do it. So they started with a concrete stage. They built an area for an orchestra. They brought in these grand operas with the expertise of Guy Golterman and crew that were part of the Grand Opera Association. There was also an advertising club event that was coming into St. Louis. So it was a convention of the advertising clubs of the country. And so let's put on our best, show, right, in many ways. And so the advertising club came to now this concrete stage with this grand performance of Aida, followed very closely by another one, Pagliacci, that was also in 1917. And then we get some things in 1918. And before you know it, we've had enough performances on this concrete stage with now the concrete and the folding chairs and the seating area that we now have a place. All we need is, a season. And that happens in 1919 when we get the first season.
First season, so the 100th was 2018.
Yep. As by seasons, that would make it 100 seasons in 2018.
One of the really impressive parts of the exhibit was a collage of programs from the very beginning up to the present.
Well, that was a sort of a feat of magic by our graphic designer at some point to be able to make that work. But I think she might have torn out a few hairs, but we got her to get all of, it's crazy, that grid, because some years they don't change. For 3-4 years you might see the same cover, and then they change every year, and now the last several years they change every week by show. And so to try and figure out how to make that work, and also then we pulled out one per decade in a way to just talk about, this is that very first program from the very first season. And then in the 20s, I pulled out one from 1927 because Charles Lindbergh shows up at the Muny and sits through a performance of Princess Pat. and then we pull out the 1931 one in the 30s because Archibald Leach is there, who goes on to be called Cary Grant in his professional career. Another
really interesting timeline is one that has a history of all the physical changes to the plant.
Yes, and that was important because, we look at the Muny today and people be like, oh, but I remember when it didn't have this, or I remember when it looked like this. So we were trying to figure out, when did all of these changes happen?
Yes.
It doesn't start out looking like the Muny that we know as of last month, but it happens over time, and there are some funny things about how they amplified in those very early years and how they would blind the audience so they could make changes on the stage because they didn't have any way of doing it any other way. No curtain ever. Now we have booms that come across, and we have a turntable, and we have ways to do that. And so that was a way to just sort of show how things change and how some things don't. Some things really look the same.
And that they did operas early on, and so it's the municipal opera, even though we always call it the Muny now. But I know in the years past, because I once talking to an older woman who asked me, well, what are they doing at the opera this year?
That's
and I started telling her what the Opera Theater of St. Louis was doing.
Right.
That sounds very strange.
Right.
Well, she meant the Muny, because that was, everybody called it the opera.
Yeah. And I mean, because it was called the Municipal Opera for many, many years. And
that's what I grew up calling it.
Yep.
You have an enormous collection of props and costumes and other memorabilia from the shows. It must have been quite a chore to pick them.
It was a lot of fun, but a chore, as you say, because there's only so many things that you can fit in a gallery. I got told, nope, we have too much already. I got told that a lot, and then interestingly, for costumes, for instance, if you want to pick iconic costumes, we have to think about our visitors who may not even know what the Muny is. So, we wanted to make sure that at least it was the easy things to identify, right? And so some of those the Muny doesn't have because they would rent a lot of costumes. So I learned very quickly, I'm not going to find a lot of the iconic costumes maybe, but the props, you can find a lot of iconic props. And so there's a lot of things in there. Tevye's cart from Fiddler on the Roof, and the deathbed from King and I are there, and Cinderella's carriage is there. And it was just fun to walk through their prop storage and just pick them.
And since it's about our memories, you have some really interesting photographs of what the audience was like over the years. people wore suits to the opera when I started going there.
That's correct. In the and way back, the very earliest photos, you see women with furs in St. Louis in the summer outside. That's crazy. Men in suits,
Yes.
also kind of crazy. But that's what they wore because they were going out to the opera. And so it was very important to dress the occasion. And today people wear whatever they wear, and it's a little different. But we talk a bit about the free seats in there. We talk a bit about how they're accessible to everybody and how they give away more seats every show than a Broadway theater would hold.
Yeah.
Total.
That was
That's
an
crazy.
interesting comparison. That
That's
the free
crazy.
seats are bigger than most Broadway theaters.
Yeah.
You also have some interactive elements, including one where you can learn to dance a bit from Chorus Line from Michael Baxter, the resident choreographer.
Yes, Michael was a gem to work with, and we asked him to pretend as if he were doing a rehearsal for our visitors. And so we filmed him doing this 16 steps, I guess, and it's amazing to watch people do that. I think people come out of there and they say that's one of the best parts of it. Even if they don't do it, they just think it's really great that it's a part of the exhibit and an opportunity to see that happen.
I wondered whether those lines were on the floor, and then when it started, he was on one.
Yep.
I was supposed to get on that one
That's
too.
right.
And
That's
then when
right.
he started, I thought, my God, that's too fast. I can never do that. And I said, so let's do it again, but slower.
Right.
It was very good.
We are running out of time, but tell us what information people need to know to see this.
So first of all, it's free. It's always free. It's open 7 days a week at the History Museum in Forest Park, other than Christmas and Thanksgiving, which will be coming up quicker than we think. And what you need is to just go in there, and it's an opportunity to be able to relive your memories of the Muny if you have them. We hope that people will leave a memory. We have a space for people to do that.
Yes.
There's an opportunity to see all sorts of parts of the Muny backstage, as well as what we see, as you said, from the seats, or even a final production in the Wizard of Oz set. We're fortunate that we just got to work with the Muny on this, and it was a huge production between the two of us. They've provided us some of the elements that you'll see in there. And just enjoy. It's a fun
fascinating.
piece.
Thank you very much.
We're fortunate to have had you talk about it, and I give it my highest recommendation.
Oh, well, thank you
Indeed,
very much.
indeed.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank
Dan.
you.